Clearly, Alan was pleased with your contributions because you started appearing on his albums, beginning with 1989's fan favorite Secrets, that also
Yeah,
featured drummer Vinny Colaiuta. You played on two tracks on that album, Joshua and
yeah,
Maid Marian, both of
yeah,
which you also wrote.
yeah.
1992, you appeared on four Wardenclyffe Tower tracks, including the album
Right,
opener 5 to 10, Sphere of Influence, Zarabeth, and Dodgy Boat, which you also wrote. Then in
yeah,
1993, I love how close together these albums were. I miss those days when you were putting out every
yeah.
couple.
That short of yeah,
1993's Hardhat area, well, you really stepped up. You played on every single track on that album and had co-writing credits on Prelude and Postlude, the openers
yeah.
and closers. Then 10 years later, you appeared on a live album recorded in Japan called Them.
Right, which was recorded in 1990, I think, actually. So
Yeah, it was recorded then and came out 10 years later. We can specify that.
yeah,
You co wrote Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. Well, all the albums I just mentioned were remastered for Alan's career retrospective box set that came out
right.
last spring. In anticipation of that release, he decided to do some shows in Southern California. And even though you hadn't played together for a while, he reached out to include you. So tell us about getting that call.
Oh yeah, since the last time I played with Al in 1995, 96, and we'd always stay in touch. You know, he called all the time, either to talk about something or just to say hi. And his very pleasant calls and everything. But I never played with him again live, until that time. Except one time, about 2 years before the event you're talking about, they did a small little tour of Virgil and maybe Jimmy Haslip. They did like a boat gig or something down off of Florida, and then they did a live broadcast kind of thing in a town in Florida, and then they played in a town called Clearwater. My older brother lives in Clearwater, so I saw that on the list. So I called my older brother. I said, "Hey, I'm going to fly down, and we're going to go see Alan Holdsworth together," you know. And my brother said, "Okay." So then I told Virgil I was coming down to see him, and then Virgil said, "Hey, you want to come sit in with Alan?" I'm like, "What?" I mean, I'd love to, but I hadn't played with him in 20 years. And Virgil, he's great. He's like, "Yeah, don't worry, man. We'll run through stuff during the sound check and all that."
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Okay." So they got like a little. I got like a little keyboard for my brother, and we set up, and so I set in with that gig. It was an amazing experience. I mean, I was trying to remember a lot of the music and all that stuff, but it didn't matter. And I played some new tunes that like Texas. We played that. I'd never played that before, so I had to learn it. And after that gig, he wasn't so keen on going out and touring anymore.
Yeah.
Turns out that was the last concert he played 2 years before he did this CD box release thing. So he hadn't played for like 2 years live. And Virgil told me that he was a little hesitant to play live. And then they talked about having me come out and play with him to kind of help out. I could play the chords and we can do some of the tunes, and he would feel more comfortable and wouldn't have all the pressure of doing all the solos. I could do some of the solos and whatnot. So he just called me and just said like, "Hey, you want to come out and do some gigs?" And I was like, I was back to being, 27 years old on that Stanley Clark tour.
Yeah.
And Alan said, "Hey, we got a tour coming up in September. Do you want to come in and, play with us?" And I had exactly that same feeling, like
Nice.
25 years, 30 years later, and I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Yes, Alan, I'll be there." And then, in typical fashion, it was all the music business. It was on, and then it was off, and then I was coming, and then it wasn't. And then finally, I just told Alan, I said, "Look, Alan, I'm going to buy a ticket because I want to come out and see you anyway. And if I play, I'll play. If I don't, that's all right. I just want to come out and see." And he said, "Okay." So anyway, it kind of worked out where I came out. We did a couple of rehearsals, and I did 3 out of those 4 last gigs that he did, and it was a beautiful experience. I know health wise he wasn't doing really good, and he's just going through tough times, and he was having a hard time just kind of playing at that point too, just because he hadn't played in a while. But he seemed really positive, and he loved the idea of us playing back together again. And we just talked. Most of the time we were together, we just talked about old things and old times, and we laughed and hugged and even cried a little bit about like all these different events that happened over the years. And it was a beautiful experience. And I don't know. Some people say it's like a divine intervention kind of thing. It was playing back together, but it was just something that happened, and he wanted to do and get these records out and do a few gigs to kind of promote it. And and unfortunately, that was the last gigs, you know.
Mm.
So I was, and out of the original band members, I was the only one that got to play with them at the end, you know, out of the original guys, you know.
Mm.
So it was a sad moment, but that it was a beautiful moment that I was able to come out and spend some time with him and talk to him and play through the tunes again. And we had a good time, you know.
Yeah,
It was,
bittersweet for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I spoke with him in March, and I think those gigs were in April. When I spoke with him, he was very upbeat. I mean, he was,
yeah.
he was just seemed very positive. This is why everyone was completely shocked, by the suddenness of his passing, because it was just a few days after you played with him, right?
Yeah, we did those 3 gigs, and then I came back home, and then he did one more gig on a Monday, and then I talked to him on that Wednesday, and he actually had some money for us. And he's like, "Man, I got some money, you know, like I'm gonna
Mhm.
send you some money." And then it was that next Saturday and Sunday that
Right.
we heard about his passing and everything. So, I mean, Alan wasn't in the best of health then, and he knew it, you know. And actually, for that last year, every time I talked to him, he just he would mention in a sort of morbid way about, well, man, I think I have a few more notes I need to put down before I croak, man, you know. So he would just bring up things like that. But I think that during that time, what I saw is that he was kind of coming to terms of where he was at this time of his life, you know. And he knew he wasn't at the peak like he was back in the '90s during the
Yeah.
hard hat areas. But and I think that bothered him a lot. But it seemed like at that time when I came out and did those gigs, he was coming to terms with that, and he was kind of okay with it, and he was ready to move forward
Yeah.
and just be who he was at the time, you know. And he was writing new tunes and moving forward, you know. And he had new ideas and he had new concepts and all that same kind of thing that he had in his younger days, you know. So it was just real sudden, and it was really sad, you know. But I saw the same thing. He seemed more upbeat, and we had some gigs in New York booked, and Virgil was trying to get this gig in Australia booked, you know. And but it's life. We kind of live one day at a time, you know.
When I spoke with him, he described himself as an old man. I'm an old man now, but he didn't do it like, with sadness in his voice. In fact, at the very end of the interview, which is what was a little bit heartbreaking to me, he was excited about his next recording. I'm working on these tracks, and I said, well, come back and play it come back to the show and let's talk about it. He goes, oh yeah, man, for sure. He seemed, that's what I mean by he seemed positive and upbeat. And from what I've heard through the back channels, he had some stuff in the can, that people would want to hear. If you're Alan Holdsworth and you've lost a step, you're still way further down the road than everybody else is.
Yeah, I mean, he had new ideas, and like there were some new tunes that we started playing when I was out there that week that I'd never played before, and just his way of thinking of compositional wise and chord wise, and it was still moving forward like he did his whole career. He never just kept writing tunes like IOU again. You know, he moved forward, and I think those last few years, as he called me, he was a little sad. You know, he's like he thought, maybe he didn't have any more new notes. And we talked, and then. But I think he kind of moved on, and he started writing tunes again. He wanted to record. I was going to help him out with the computer stuff because he kept saying, he goes, yeah, I need a little help with all this new fandango kind of computer biz. I don't. He was more in the analog world and
Definitely.
tapes and boards and all that stuff. So I was going to help. I was going to come out and help him out with that, and we talked about getting things finished and it was, we had plans. So
sounds like another version of Steve. I'm working with a cassette tape. Come here and help me.
yeah,
It's like technology fast and
exactly.
by.
I need a little bit of help, which is, when you're a fan of Alan, you think like, wow, it's amazing. Alan's asking me for help. I've never met anybody in my life, even my colleagues at Berkeley, that know scales and harmony and that kind of stuff and theory more than Alan. Is like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So one time we were at a gig, we were like doing sound check, and he looked over at me, he goes, hey, Steve, what are you thinking about this chord? Are you thinking an E flat scale or an A flat scale? And first of all, I was like, oh my God, Einstein is asking me about my ideas of theories of relativity. I'm like, Alan Holdsworth asking me about scales? And I was like totally nervous. I'm like, what if I give the wrong answer? I don't know. But he loved to talk about, recording and composition and scales and tunes, and it was kind of cool that at the very end there, he was still asking for help for this and that, and he wanted to do new things, and he had new ideas. It's just the kind of mind he had. He's an inventor too, so he just had that mind where he always wanted to create and move forward. And if he felt he couldn't do that, it really affected him a lot. So
Yeah, he was
especially.
a modest and self-deprecating person, but he also had to know that he had a unique talent and
Yeah, I
ability.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think he knew he had something special.
yeah. Well, I know he touched a lot of people because, in the immediate aftermath, two concerned friends of the family, Manning Bartlett and Greg Beaton, had the presence of mind to launch a fundraising campaign, to help cover Alan's funeral expenses. And their goal was to raise 20 grand. Within 48 hours, they'd receive 5 times that amount, which was a testament to the devotion of Alan's fans, all the respect and love that was there for what he did and who he was. And, in the aftermath, we mentioned this a little bit, there were some tribute concerts put together in New York and Los Angeles that you participated in. The first ones were at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City. And I was going to ask you, you already kind of answered this, what it was like to perform his music without Alan being there.
Yeah.
Obviously some talented people stepped in, but, you can't substitute the original. And I respect those guys for having the courage to try.
Oh,
But so you had mentioned, you missed his leadership.
yeah. Like I said, everybody that stepped in and played were just amazing, and I knew most of them anyway. But I mean, they even say this is hard shoes to fill. You can't. I can imagine having to do a tribute for Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock or Joe Zawinul. It would be overwhelming. I'm like, I don't belong here. But they all stepped in and they played beautifully and they learned the tunes and every one of them did their own thing to it, which Alan would have appreciated.
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, it was just, although I really loved it, I loved them. It was just a little weird. I'm playing through, Looking Glass or Non-Brood, and then I just look across stage and Alan's not there. It was just. It was really tough for me to get through those gigs, especially the New York ones, because it was so close to his passing.
Yes.
And he, just to look across stage and there he wasn't there, but we were playing these tunes. So I sort of just kind of I got in this mindset and this kind of Zen state of just thinking about the old days when I played with him and him being with us in spirit. And it was a little weird, and then. Playing his music without him.
Yeah, yeah.
But I really enjoy playing his music. I try to play it even here in Boston as much as I can. I do solo piano stuff. I'll play a few of his tunes, or I have a couple of groups here, and we'll play Funnels or Hoodwood, some of the easier ones. If you call those easy,
right. It's all relative.
Yeah, and every time I play his tunes, even when he was around alive, every time I play his tunes, I just think of him and think of the time we had together and. It's inspiring and it's beautiful time in my life. So
well, I personally didn't see the New York shows, but I did fly out to L.A. for the baked potato gigs.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, it's a very intimate place to hear live music, and you're practically on stage with the band. You guys all played your asses off, particularly Chad and Virgil. I mean, it was a real treat to see Chad Wackerman and Virgil Donati drum up close and personal like that because they're two of the best. But in terms of your playing. Let's talk breath controller.
Oh yeah.
I bought a Yamaha DX7 in '85, and I knew it was an option because there was a little port for it on the keyboard. But I don't remember many players actually using those.
I think the first one I can remember is Dave Sanchez when he had that KX8 and he was using the breath controller in the early '80s, and that was hooked up to it's an old technology, and I remember seeing David Sanchez do that with a breath controller. Mm-hmm. And then Alan did it, and but he had an analog version of that, and it was kind of cool. But I bought this KX88 like a few years back, and it was like an old controller of the Yamahas, and the guy that sold it to me for like $300, he said, "Oh, I'll throw this in too," and it was a box of that breath controller, and so I had it for a lot of years, and I just never plugged it in, and then I was at the back of one of my synths, the Atari synth controller. And I just see this little hole, and I read it. It says breath controller. I'm like, I wonder if I can plug that Yamaha thing in there, And so I plugged it in, and it worked perfect. I was like, I was in heaven. So I used it here in Boston for about a year. So when I went out to play with Alan that last little few gigs, we were in rehearsal, and I didn't tell Alan I had that thing. And so I plugged it in. All of a sudden, I get my patch up and I start doing the breath control. And he looks across the room. He's like, He goes, "Oh man!" He goes, "Where'd you get?" He goes, "I need that thing, man. Where'd you get that?"
Yeah.
Because it's like MIDI, and he figured he could like use it with his new MIDI
Oh,
computer setup and all that stuff. Uh, and so he was like really excited I had that thing. But it's really cool. And so I've been using it for the last few years.
mhm.
And in fact, I just got a new version of it, the DEC Control,
Mm.
which is a Danish company that makes one, really expensive. But I'd love to get an endorsement from them so I can get some.
Yeah, let's work on that.
Yeah, but that one uses the same technology as the Yamaha version, but it's USB, so I can plug it in now with my
Nice.
system, and
Nice.
um, so yeah, that's probably what you saw me play with then. But it's a cool thing, the breath control. It kind of gives you a way of playing more horn like. It just gives more expression to the filter and vibrato than you can do with your hands or fingers.
You just played it on a handful of tunes. I just remember maybe 2 or 3 times. But the first time I looked over and you were using it, I go, "Oh, that's what those things." I mean, I'd seen some photos of Alan with one, and obviously I knew what they were from the owner's manual when I first bought
Yeah.
the DX. I mean, like they were like volume pedal and a few different options, And what I'm saying is, I knew a lot of
Right.
people who had the board but didn't use that option or play. It's kind of like you think of the talk box. You think of Peter Frampton,
Yeah.
maybe Joe Walsh, maybe Tell Me
Yeah.
Something Good, one off, and nobody was really using them. I guess part of the reason was there were some serious the voltage or something go through that. Some people were like having their teeth
Get
blown out of
shocked.
their mouth. Yeah, so that might be part of it.
That's a danger. Yeah, you don't
But
want that.
it's great that you guys did an East Coast and a West Coast on those. And you're right, the New York ones were pretty shortly after it. The LA ones were a little bit later, as I recall. And then almost
Yeah.
immediately after those LA gigs, you guys went to Australia.
Yeah, because Virgil tried to eat. Alan didn't really want to travel, but this thing in Melbourne, Virgil and Alan agreed to go to it too. Because he'd stay at one place, one hotel, and you play for 4 or 5 nights in one place, and it would be easy. So he agreed to do it, but unfortunately, he passed away before, and so Virgil kept the show, and we went out and did that in Australia. Just shortly after this. So that was in January, February.
Right.
We did that. So.
So I know that over the course of your career, you've traveled all over the globe, and you've seen quite a bit more of it than the average person. Is there any particular place you'd rank as your all-time favorite spot on Earth?
Oh, I mean, being from a little small town in Texas, like I was saying, I grew up there, and in fact, I never even, besides being born in Oklahoma and living in Kansas, I never even left Texas until I came to Boston. So like I knew about Texas and small town, and when I came to Boston, I was like, wow, look at this old city, and then when I got to start touring and I went to Europe, and I was sort of like the more of the tourist of the band. Any place we went, I would get up in the morning and I would get my camera and I would just go down to the village and to the market and to where all the people were. And I would just look around. I would go look at old churches or old buildings and take pictures. And Alan wasn't so much of as a tourist. I mean, he's from Europe, so maybe he was used to it or something. But he was one. So, but I would always do that. So every town that I went to, I would just really take in. I love the community. I just watch people like interact in the day, whether I was in France or Italy. I loved Italy. It's just the food in Italy is great. And
Yeah.
every place had its own kind of really unique thing: buildings, the people, the food.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't think of one that
Right.
I mean, Italy and France is always nice,
Yeah.
But recently I went to China, and that was like really a beautiful experience, and seeing new cultures and people. But and the thing about it, when I traveled, it was always in with music. I was playing with Stanley or Alan or somebody, and so the interaction with the people were like really beautiful too, because they were there to see you create art, and they loved the art, and you created the art. It was like a it was a thing that brought all these people together,
Yeah.
no matter the different cultures, the different language, or the different political aspects of it. It was just all by the wayside. We were all there in one building, in one room, just doing art.
Yeah, it's a great way to see the world because they're
Yeah.
giving something to you, their culture, and there's the sights you go see, and you're giving something to them, something that
Right.
So it's mutual. Is there some place
Yeah.
you've always wanted to visit but you haven't made it there yet?
Well, we almost went to Russia,
Oh.
but that didn't happen. And then one time, this was much later after I wasn't in the band anymore. There was going to be sort of a reunion that me and Gary and Jimmy and Alan, we were going to go to India.
Wow.
And then that fell through too. So both of those things. So I mean, I would love to go to India and do something there, and just, you know, that's one place I hadn't been to. But I've been to a lot of, you know, I've been all over South America and a lot of places in Asia and Australia a few times. You know, I've been very fortunate just to be able to travel, and for my business, and to play the music I got to play. You know, I mean,
Right.
there wasn't a time when I get on stage to play with any of these musicians that I just wasn't just overwhelmed and thrilled and blessed. And, you know, what a great life. I wrote a tune on this past record of mine that came out, and it's called "It's a Good Life." You know, and I'm just thinking about all the experiences I had, and the different things and musicians I get to play with, and it's been a good life. You know, there's nothing I can complain about. You know.